What is up, you guys? Tiana Talent of the Talent Method coming to you with another video. Today's video is going to focus on my personal hip flexor rehab. So I'll give you some background on this injury that I've had, but just real quick, we're going to jump right into what this exercise is. So this is a version of a single leg RDL. What I'm really focusing on today is making sure that my shin angle stays perpendicular to the floor. So I'm really trying to not let my knee come forward at all and really focusing on actually hinging so I can really feel this in my glute med, get a good stretch in my hamstring, and focus on that single leg stability. So you can see in my ankle, my poor right leg is working super hard. My right leg balance is significantly worse than my left leg balance for a number of reasons. One of them being, well, I guess the primary reason my balance is not as good is I have a lot of chronic inflammation on my right knee. Uh, it probably started 3 or 4 years ago. I fell and sliced my knee open on a chunk of ice and had to have multiple layers of stitches put in my knee. It's never been the same after that. And then I had an MRI done at the end of last year, and it showed medial meniscus tear, some ACL and MCL strains. So I've been dealing with chronic inflammation on this knee. So my right side is just never quite as balanced as my left side. So I'm definitely just spending some more time on that side today, trying to wake it up a little bit. So then I'll show the same exercise on my left side. And you'll also notice that I'm doing this on a smushy mat. Um, while unstable surfaces have literally zero advantage for like muscle hypertrophy, I find that for proprioception exercises or balance exercises, having an unstable surface is super helpful. So this exercise I actually really like doing on on a slightly unstable surface. I find it super helpful. It just makes my brain work a little bit harder to connect to all the muscles that are working. So, why am I rehabbing my hip flexor in the first place? So, I started primarily, or I guess I started solely weightlifting a little bit over 18 months ago, and I started with a coach who I'm still with currently, which is awesome. Anytime you can establish a long-term working relationship with a coach, it's just amazing. But during one of the first squat cycles we did, I think I was going for a heavy set of 6, and I was just pushing it because that's what I do, and kind of came out of the middle or came through the middle of the squat kind of weird, and definitely had some classic impingement symptoms in my right hip. So long story short, spent some time not squatting, then spent some time working back into box squats, all sorts of different um, squat variations that weren't painful for me. And that actually went pretty well, I would say, overall. However, I had some health issues early this year that just prevented me from training hard at all. And then my chronic knee inflammation got really bad. So, long story short, I spent the majority of this beginning of this year, 2019, not squatting. And I would say in the last month or two, we've slowly started working back into things, which has been great. But I've definitely noticed my hip flexor starting to flare back up a little bit. So, basically, all of the exercises in today's videos are just some things I am doing to rehab. So started with that hip hinging exercise, and then um, single leg squats are a really good way for me to work on both full range of motion and stability. So you can't really see it from this angle, but my positioning on my left leg is actually like pretty good. My hip goes straight back from my knee goes right over my ankle, and then I guess you can kind of see on my right side, it's like way more wobbly. And if you were to see it from the back, my knee goes to the inside of my foot and my hip kind of pops out, which is a pretty classic pattern for single leg squats. But I did notice today that as I was warming up that it got a little bit better. Um, so these are, I call them single leg deck squats. I guess that's what they would be called. And I was just using these today to kind of warm up for pistols because I wanted to do some pistol squats for my hip flexor and just overall positioning work. So these were just my way of warming up for that. Um, I could definitely tell that I haven't done these in a while, but it did feel like really good to move through them. Um, One thing you can do to modify this is you can see that I'm rolling back on this mat. You could totally make that mat higher if you're having trouble with this full range of motion, or if you're a freaking rock star, you could obviously just go onto the ground, and that will definitely make it a little bit harder. But definitely a great exercise to start working if you're working toward pistols or single leg squat, or you just want to work on some single leg stuff. These deck squats are a freaking awesome way to build in some more single leg work into your program, whether it's prehab or not. So then after I did some alternating ones, I think I wanted to try and do, I think I did 5 on each leg just to see my poor little quads. I wanted to see what my quads could do. So I was actually like pretty happy with how these felt. I was really focusing on this side on driving my knee straight forward, and trying to keep my chest tall out of the bottom. You can see I'm kind of like hunching my chest forward even more so on this right side. And yeah, even just watching that right ankle, you can see how much more difficult it is for me to balance on that right leg. But one thing I've noticed in my snatch in particular lately is my freaking right leg does all sorts of weird things. So I'm guessing it's a combination of my hip flexor stuff, my difficulty with really good knee flexion, and then just probably poor balance overall on that right side. So my hope is that by doing some more unilateral work that I can fix my weird right leg movement in the snatch. So working into some pistols without my shoes on, but you can see my right heel even comes up on that right side. So then I decided to put my shoes on to give myself a little bit better ankle mobility, and these felt like way smoother. So I definitely like to do basically all my warm-up work in bare feet because I think it is really good for me to try getting that ankle range of motion without the heel lift in my weightlifting shoes. But it also felt good to give myself that heel and kind of just turn these over a little bit faster. This is the closest thing I've done to cardio in months. But yeah, these felt pretty good. The nice thing about my hip flexor is it definitely feels tight, but it's not like in that it's not in that acute pain phase, so I can actually do a lot with it, and it tolerates it pretty well. So this exercise I freaking love, and you'll see why I really like it in the second version that I do, but basically I think that's like a 15-pound kettlebell I ended up using, and all I'm doing is pulling my knee into my chest and then really controlling that eccentric motion of my foot going down toward the floor. So the reason this exercise is awesome is because I'm lengthening my hip flexor on that eccentric motion, and I'm getting actually some pretty good concentric strengthening too when my knee is pulling into my chest. One of the reasons I like the eccentric work on this is because you can see my face. One of the reasons I like the eccentric portion of this exercise is because I actually need a lot of hip extension on my right side because my right leg is what goes back in my jerk. And I actually think that my limited hip extension on that right side is something that limits my ability to get into a good receiving position for the jerk. Because what ends up happening is because I'm limited in my hip extension, um, I end up using lumbar or spine extension to compensate, which really destabilizes you when you have weight over your head. So I'm really optimistic that doing some more hip extension mobility is going to help my receiving position for the jerk. So I was super excited about this variation today. This is actually the first time I've done this exercise like this. And you can literally see, like, if my shin was just up a little bit higher, that's exactly what position my legs need to be in when I'm receiving a jerk. And I could feel like how tight my right hip was in that position, which just tells me that I need to spend some time getting more comfortable with that right leg and extension. I think probably I just didn't rehab this very well the first time, or it's just a chronic issue related to my knee inflammation. So this is definitely something that I'm going to spend some time doing realistically any day before I do jerks. I will definitely do this exercise. I think today I did basically 3 sets of 5 on each side, and that seemed like a good volume, just moving through them nice and slow. Um, Again, I really like that eccentric portion of this because it is really like a good stretch. And you can't really see because of my shirt, but I am really focusing on keeping my ribs pulled down so I'm not arching my spine. So I'm really working on keeping my spine neutral, if not a little bit posterior, in that posterior rotation or posterior tilt, so that I'm actually stretching, um, putting a really good stretch on one specific muscle, my rectus femoris, which is the only quadricep muscle that crosses both the hip and the knee joint. Um, so really this exercise is targeting extension of that muscle because I'm having to stretch it over both the knee and hip joint, especially in this bottom position here. So if you have any hip impingement symptoms, pinching in the bottom of your squat, kind of that like classic butt wink, which isn't always a terrible thing, but if it destabilizes you, it's probably something you want to work on. This would be a really good exercise to play around with. So my favorite part of the session today is actually picking up the empty bar. So today was like a rest day for me. Generally on Thursdays, we call it like quote unquote active recovery, which just means that I typically go into the gym and do some rehab work like I'm showing you guys today. And then I spend 15 or 20 minutes playing around with the empty bar and just really, my goal is to actually put my body in good positions after spending all this time warming up really well. And what was really cool is after doing all that hip flexor stuff, I felt so much more stable in the bottom of my squat position. This is just entertaining. If you've ever tried to redo your ponytail with your thumbs taped, bless you, because I could not do it. Oh my gosh, this is like long hair problems right here. I also look very concerned. So yeah, I was super pumped at how good my squat position felt after all that hip flexor stuff, which to me tells me that it did exactly what I wanted to. It's helping my body get into better positions, which in my brain is the point of doing mobility work. Yeah, you can see I'm definitely bouncing up out of the bottom of a squat way better than I normally do. I wonder if part of that wasn't just warming up my ankles too. Truth be told, I am not the best at warming up before I lift. I generally come in, do some crossover symmetry exercises for my shoulders because those have been really what I've been focusing on lately. And then I do some empty bar stuff. So the fact that everything felt so much better after spending a solid hour working on hip flexor stuff, um, I definitely need to start incorporating more hip stuff into my warm up. Um, so that's something I will definitely be doing after how differently things felt today. Um, once once I picked up the bar, I think I dropped the bar on my shoe. Oh, sweet. So then I did just a little bit of snatch empty bar stuff, and then I spent some time playing around with my jerk, especially after that exercise I showed you guys laying on the bench. Um, and I think it was in this first set. I don't know if you'll be able to actually see it, but I know the first few reps I wasn't really thinking about trying to extend the front of my right hip. But on one of these reps, there we go. So it was super subtle, but I actually felt like I could feel myself like pull my ribs down and actually really like squeeze my butt. So it just looks like a much more balanced split position than I am normally able to get into. So it was really cool to get that, just to have that feedback that um, that I need more hip extension in order to get into a good stable position. Because again, if I don't have enough hip extension to stay stable through my midline, then I'm going to break at my midline, which is when I go into a ton of back extension, which is kind of the pattern I generally end up in my jerk, which leads to me missing a lot more of them than I really need to. So I'm actually super pumped about how good this felt. Also, if you need any help with positioning in the jerk, that is my most favorite drill. So just rewind that and just do it a few times. It's so helpful. Then I just finished up with a few reps of good old split jerk. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. And as always, follow me on Instagram at Tiana Nicole Talent. Love you guys so much.